This is High Noon live on LinkedIn, and I'm your host, Nico Steyn. Welcome back to the show. We've already started with What's Your Story? I've introduced Kim. Thank you again for doing this, Kim, from Mark. Kim writes stories that are Christian-based and also really good value, epic stories, right, Kim? And she's already done this in the first section to talk about it. But I want to ask you about your stories. What are the basic set of rules that you create in order to come up with characters that are slightly, or situations that are slightly sanitized, obviously, and there's not a lot of evil, but there is evil, right?
Yes, there is some evil.
Okay, we're going to talk about that as well. So first, tell me how you come up with these characters.
Okay, so my inspiration originally, I've got a daughter who is full of fire and passion, and she does incredibly dangerous things. And in the beginning, all that we were ever doing was reprimanding her because we were terrified that she was actually going to kill herself with these crazy things that she was doing. And I began to see that those are her strengths, although at the time it kind of feels like a weakness. So I decided to create a series based on her personality type that shows the evolution of this character and how those values that she's got, or those unique talents that she's got, actually can be celebrated.
Beautiful.
So this story is really that parents could even give it to their older teens and say, these are the value systems that I'm wanting to instill in my child. But kids, they're like, you sometimes say, let's talk about this, and they're like, I don't want to hear about that. So it puts it in a high epic adventure setting, but the value systems are there. So you kind of are introducing the value systems without being too in your face about it.
Excellent, excellent. Now you're talking exactly to this point where somebody who may be viewing this, who is a storyteller for corporate world and has serious business and, messaging that they wanted to get across, you're talking about something that finds an exciting and pulls people in, right?
Yes,
and how does that connection work, do you think, with an audience?
Well, firstly, you've got to think quite deeply and see what is the thing that you are trying to portray to people. And then you've got to say, how can I run a story around that? What is the experience? Because all good stories have got that inciting moment. What caused this thing to happen? So it doesn't matter what you are creating. If you can say, the pain that comes from that moment, whether it is that you lost all of your household possessions and you needed to get insurance, or it is any kind of invention, any kind of story, there must be a point of pain, and this thing that you are creating must solve that problem in a very relatable manner. So you throw yourself into, how would I be feeling if I was in that situation? Not just giving facts. There must be emotion. There must be stakes. What are the highest stakes? What can I lose if this problem is not solved?
I think you're hitting all the right points here, because you're talking about the emotion, you're talking about that connection, you're talking about the experience that a reader or a viewer in this instant must have in order to really connect. Do you think that there's a specific rule about the kind of characters, or we've talked before the break about characters that can really connect well, or ideas? What works really well for you in your genre?
Well, firstly, I have to have the baddie.
There has to be evil.
There has to be baddies. But when you're writing bad things, and this actually, I think when you're working on a press perspective, if you are the baddie, someone has got to connect with why you made that kind of decision. So what we said beforehand is that even Hitler, he was a hero in his own story. When he started out, there were certain rights that he wanted to wrong. He got a little bit crazy in going through with it.
Lost the plot.
But you need to have that moment where the reader or the audience say, if I was in that situation, would I react in that way? It's got to bring that question that you can't just say, okay, we just absolutely hate you. You have to say, hang on a moment. If someone went and killed my whole family, would I react out of love, or would I want vengeance? And when I want vengeance, can it be distorted to go overboard? That's the big thing, that whether it's a good person or a bad person, it has to be relatable to the audience.
I love that, and I think relatability is the one. And then, of course, that authenticity to say, even if we create then an evil character or, let's say, an opponent,
Yes.
The point is that a character wants to have an opponent that is as strong as the lead character,
Yes.
because otherwise it's flimsy and it feels inauthentic. Now, people may be watching this as business people, going, but how do I build that into a real life story? What sort of advice would you have for something?
I would take the problem that you're trying to present and your solution and have a look at it and say, how does that make me feel? When I first, so as an entrepreneur, what happens is you have a lot of passion when you start out. You say, oh, I think it would be a good idea to create a cup holder in the car, let's say, for argument's sake. Now, quite some time back, there was a brand that had extremely hot coffee, and a woman burnt herself in that situation, and she took them to court. Now, if you are the person that's created this cup warmer in your car, then you have to say, how would I feel if I was that person that was being burnt? What was the physio that she had to go through? She had to go through massive amount of surgery to heal from that situation, and you've got to resonate with that pain.
Yeah.
And you've got to say, okay, my solution solves that problem. And that's the story that you are creating and bringing the emotion. If you can't make the person connect emotionally with your corporate story, your writing story, they are not going to buy it.
Exactly. And in a way, it's almost as if you could personify the problem, right? Because if you could think the way that the problem thinks, then it has a real deep purpose, not to cause pain necessarily, but to move, as you said, from that point as the bad character, because it works with authenticity.
Correct.
So I want to ask you about how your books. Do you plan everything as a broad story or an arc of 3, 4? It's 4 books that you have now?
So far, I've got 4 books, but this will be a series of 6.
Okay, so that's exactly so. So when you start to plan the relationships and the characters, do you place all of those characters up front, or do they happen as you write?
So as an author, you get a thing called a pantser, and then you get a plotter. A plotter plans everything. A pantser like, oh, well, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants and just write how I feel. Okay. So definitely the first story, I had an overarching arc where I was going to work with it, but I then just wrote by the seat of my pants. But for me, each book introduces a different kind of value system. So even though it's fantasy and there are dragons and there are bishops and priests and all kinds of people in there, even though I've got that, each individual book has got a theme. The first theme was overcoming or getting hope when your obstacles just seem insurmountable. The second one was about forgiving yourself and other people, because sometimes bad people do things to you, but sometimes you are the person that's created the problem for yourself. The third one was about overcoming bullying, and the fourth one was depression. And I've used themes that people can relate to now.
Exactly that, relatable. Thank you, Kim. This is so interesting. We could talk for another 10 hours, I'm sure. Thank you very much. I think what really landed for me is you're talking about authenticity. You're really talking about planning or giving a personality to evil or even a bad force or something, so that we can personify it, and then to create this really great balance of, you're talking about values, which really was exciting to me as well. And I hope that this resonated. If there's time, please do pop a question into the box. We're going to answer some questions in the third segment, which is coming up right after this, because still to come there is Binge, and you're watching High Noon Live on LinkedIn.